name is Kirill Klimov. I help organizations to pursue evolutionary change to become a fit for purpose, or like if you wish, fitter for purpose. I was born and now live in Kiev, Ukraine, which is Eastern Europe. So this presentation is actually like the next version, next variation of the talk I was doing a couple times. So this is like the evolution within this topic. We'll see how it goes. Few previous iterations took place last year. I would say quite passionate about these topics I'm going to talk about today. So I'm changing some of the stuff based on my actually experience and practice, and also based on what I'm learning. So I have collected, basically there are two parts for this talk. I've collected several observations and kind of conclusions from working with different organizations. Through the years, I will share those. And basically, the second part is more around the role of the leadership, and basically how you can improve and develop the leadership. So one of the, and yeah, by the way, I believe slides will be available, will be sent to all participants. If not, anyway, I will upload them online, so they will be available. And all of the topics I'm mentioning in this talk today, like all the things, if like suddenly you would like to learn more and explore some of those, most of the stuff has links on it, so you can click and learn more. Also, like at the end, I'll suggest some of the readings on the topic. So one of the let's basically slowly start. And one of the tricks I'm using through the trainings that I'm leading would be start drawing something and then ask participants to basically guess what it is. And it's a bit harder to do, like obviously with the presentation, but right from here, I can think a lot of you can guess what it is. And yes, this is the Kanban, basically a framework to help decision making, developed by Dave Snowden in the 90s during his time in IBM. And I apologize in advance for those who haven't heard about it. I don't know the way how to explain it quickly. As I see it, more or less a normal explanation, it takes like a day, better two. So for those who haven't heard, I recommend highly getting to know about it. To me, very useful, interesting model. For those who have heard, however, probably some time passed since, I should say that some of the development is going on, and as you can see, the model on the slide I have is kind of different from the what you could have seen 5 years ago. Also, another interesting part is recently the book had been published, so you can actually buy a real book. Yeah, they finally did it. So to me, yeah, and it's interesting. The title on the slide is a book just in Russian. That one haven't translated. So the most interesting to me part about the model is not even connected to the 5 domains that you can see on previous screen. And it's not only, it's not the definition of where you are, not even the determine which aspects of your system are at which domain. The most interesting to me is about moving in between different domains and they focuses quite a lot on those dynamics. But today, I'm not going basically to talk about that. I'm showing the picture just to illustrate the couple of most common problems with organizational change that I have seen in the past over and over when working with organizations. So the first one, so problem number one and top of my list is the classic approach. Let's call an expert and he will fix everything for us, or at least tell us how to fix everything. What's the difficulty with this? Experts exist as a solution to the problem in a complicated domain. Many organizational challenges or aspects of those challenges are located in a complex domain. In a complex, everything is determined by the context, as you know. So a solution that worked in one context turned out to be useless in, or even harmful actually, in other contexts. And like, it's good if you are lucky. And if you are lucky and the expert that you've invited are like expert enough to understand and use the tools from the complex domain to solve the problem. Because if he begins basically just to explain and how to live in a new way, that has like very little chances of success. That's why the constant over-interest, I would say, of many organizations in successful cases are still pretty much like surprising to me, even though like I can see it over and over and over again in the market around. Successful case looks nice and beautiful, but it doesn't really mean that if it worked for them, it's going to work for you. In fact, from the point of view of like learning or training, unsuccessful cases are much more interesting than the successful ones, because in case of unsuccessful changes, it's usually easier to trace and understand causal relationships than again for the successful cases. Then basically problem number two, or challenge number two in my list, and my favorite one, and that one is like relatively new, became more and more widespread over the last decade, I think. If you have a hammer, everything around becomes nails. You've probably heard that. Complex domain has its own tools to be used. And since there is no way to predict the cause-effect relationship, you can only trace it backward. The approach is to build and run experiments, try, look at the results like A3, all that good stuff. Like I'm sure a lot of you are pretty much familiar with that toolkit. And there are even special folks, specialists in the area, and they are called, right, agile coaches. And very typical, unfortunately, the problem is to always use your beloved and understandable toolkit regardless of the domain. And simple and close illustration would be the Get Kanban game. And I think a lot of people might have some experience with it. And basically, if we are talking about games, it gives me a quick opportunity to promote this article. So some time ago, I've created Kanban-related games and simulations list. By now, I think there's more than 30 games simulations over there. And it was actually created like even before the COVID time. So like during the last year, I've also split it and added online simulation there. So if you have to introduce some of these flow concepts for your team through the experience first, you can check it out. Like, so in the past, I was like during the game, I was roaming around groups, around tables, and like these days becomes roaming in between breakout rooms, observing what is happening, and sometimes asking questions. And during that set of the questions, basically, as those of you who have played, you know that the game has very specific and understandable rules with set boundaries. And despite this, very often when I ask the question, like what will happen in some specific case or specific scenario, I got an answer like, okay, now we'll try it, then observe, and we'll conduct a retrospective to decide what to do with it. And you don't have to try, observe, and reflect if you can do a calculation. If you are in a complicated, not in complex. The use of tools from complex to complicated domain is not justified at all. It takes more time in organizational context, it takes more money. By no means all aspects of our activity are in complex. And this is a gross simplification, which is often used to justify the use of our beloved tools. So Klimov and Kanban method. The principles in the Kanban method were divided into service delivery principles and change management principles for a reason. And actually now there is even one more set, scaling principles. So now there are even more, like 3 sets of principles. The context of value delivery, I can think of like upstream Kanban and building the system as the result of feedback loop from the market. All this explains well the positioning of the domains, but I won't, because like today our focus lean towards the context of the change management. So if you check the change management principles, which are on the slide, explaining like step-by-step evolutionary experimental approach within the Kanban method to change management, I think the solution is clear. So from here on, we'll focus more on the evolutionary change. And basically the key central place in the evolutionary or in the Kanban method, I would say, is occupied by this so-called formula, which describes the approach of implementing evolutionary steps. I think many have already seen it. I'll like super quickly run through it. So basically, stressor is the first component. It's such a stimulus. It should be strong enough not to go unnoticed, but not too strong, basically, to kill you. Reflection mechanism will allow to understand and see the effect of the stressor. So it's like the fuel and the car. One won't work with another one. Like a typical example from the Kanban world is visualization. It's a stressor, and then feedback mechanism is a daily meeting. Thanks to it, stressor begins to work. And like the generic kind of textbook, recipe book, Kanban maturity model basically provides some of the classic stressors and feedback mechanisms for different levels of maturity, or if you wish, depending on the level of maturity. It is clearly like not an exhaustive list, like other cases are possible as well. So, and thanks basically to the third element in the formula, in fact, changes occurs. So let's talk for a minute about the most popular problems or challenges, or in other words, what can go wrong with the formula. You've probably heard about the most popular like stressor problems. And like the first one would be that the stressor is not strong enough. So it's I would say, quite common problem. The stressor should lead you out of your comfort zone, but not too much. And more of that on the next slide. Non-obvious consequence of this process is that basically your comfort zone grows over time as you repeat the exercise. So accordingly, what previously have been a good stressor is no longer so. and the stressor is too strong, which is the next one. And on the way of like mastering evolutionary approach and the Kanban, which of course, like for my case, went through trial and errors. I remember very well the times when it seems to me that the first like serious change in a system that caused strong resistance was introduction of the weak limits, which may happen, by the way. However, over time, I saw that even previous steps can also cause serious resistance. For example, if transparency is not part of the organizational culture, or say all kinds of politics are popular, I would say like in such organization, even visualization can be too stressful and cause serious resistance. And interesting to me observation is that after you know and understand Kanban maturity model, you start to explain quite a lot of things through its prism. If I restrain myself with like typical mistakes associated with stressors, I won't do that with the reflection mechanisms, because perhaps the main difficulties or challenges, I would say, that I can see over and over with the choice of the mechanism is that it does not correspond to the organizational maturity, and that may go in both directions. So the use of the advanced methods to a basic level of maturity, or the use of the same mechanism despite of growth of maturity, and none of that actually like makes sense. Well, like with all that, both with the stressors and with the mechanism, all these problems are quite solvable, I would say. And the level of knowledge in Kanban university terms of KCP, which is Kanban, so should be like sufficient for identification and fixing all of this. Now, with the third part, it becomes much way more interesting. And third principle of change management in Kanban is leadership at all levels, as you know already on previous slides. Third component of the evolutionary formula is leadership. So it is crucial, it is necessary, and when the system highlights you what in the context is going wrong and needs to be changed, then something needs to be done about it. It's not going to happen by itself. As I often explain and say at classes, strengths and weaknesses are often directly related. And the principle of start with what you do now is often bought beautifully and quickly because it is safe enough and does not require effort and resources. It's easy to get started from there, but also if you do nothing later, you will not move away from the point where you are now. And evolutionary change through the constant little experimentation involves doing these little steps, experiments. If you don't, you stay where you are. Any change is about leadership, and again, it's crucial and necessary. Like another illustration for this, and it could be the version 1 reports. Yes, I'm realistic about the fact that those reports are not likely to be a valid representation of all agile practitioners. Still, with that said, like it still might be interesting sometimes to check results reported by this group of practitioners. And what I've checked for the top challenges experienced adopting agile through the reports of last 4 years. And here you can see it. Interestingly, it's quite similar year to year, so not much of the things change here. And also quite interesting that most of these challenges, if not all, are connected to the leadership. like obviously like culture is directly related to leadership and so on. So basically leadership, again, as I said, is quite crucial, and what we can do about it. Like reflecting now, I understand that many strong ideas, like theories, models, and so on, come to me through like several iterations, sometimes with the years in between these iterations. So it was with Kinevin, about which I have already spoken. It took several iterations, including the class with the author, to see the power behind it. And actually the same happened with our next topic. I've got the first taste of it in 2012, I believe. And then the real journey started when I tried the instrument on myself. So I used the tool in 2015, and it was a shock for me. The shock of discovering myself, or like exploring myself, if you wish. I didn't know back then that like it's a typical story and that it happens like almost every time through this process. But let's explore basically what I'm talking here about. This is Robert, or Bob, Bob Anderson. More than 30 years ago, he began to deal with leadership. Then there were like already a sufficient number of theories and approaches about the leadership. And what I like about Bob is that instead of inventing his own bicycle, he started integrating, testing, researching, and validating these approaches. It took 20 years to build a coherent system. So what's inside? There are like 3-in-1, a theoretical integrated model, basically a tool for measuring leadership competences, and then a structured way of leadership development. So let's take a closer look at these components. The organization cannot perform at a higher level than the consciousness of the leadership. That's Bob quote. So the organizational development is limited by the level of its leaders. Yeah, take a look. The consciousness is such a strange word, kind of not from the business world, right? Leader may think, okay, consciousness, but like, where is the money? Where are the results? The word thinking is perceived a little easier because the connection between how we think and how we act is quite obvious. But consciousness goes a bit further. It shows the connection between actions and who I am. Consciousness is the operating system for productivity. I really like this metaphor. Everyone knows like what the operating system is. It provides some set of tools and parameters that directly affect performance. Like hardly anyone is running Windows 3.11 now, right? Operating systems of computers are updated regularly, providing new possibilities for applications, the expectations of which are constantly growing. The architecture of the solution determines the outcome. The architecture of our mind determines our productivity. And it's also being updated, or at least it should be updated. There is a convincing research on this topic, but I think that it's like even without the research, we can see it in our lives. Like think of yourself as a teenager and then 5-10 years ago. Something has changed, right? Consciousness of the adult also evolves, but it does so only when it goes through adaptive challenges. So let's talk about these adaptive challenges. So first, they look like they are unsolvable, but we have to solve them. Secondly, we do not know that they are adaptive, and we think that we can solve the problem with existing tools. For example, buy a tool like Jira or borrow a model. By the way, like small puzzle for you, old one, but still very relevant. You can copy, but you cannot paste. What is it? Right, it's a Spotify model. Third, adaptive problems cannot be solved with the same level of thinking which they were created. They make us change. Here are a couple of examples of the challenges leaders facing on an ongoing basis that I can see over and over. So the first one of these couple of examples, painfully relevant from my experience, you've probably heard about this conflict of interest of change the business versus run the business. So the separation of strategy and operations and their conflict with each other. Or like another one, which is quite popular that I see over and over, there's a contradiction which is paramount, the team or the value stream. The problem of modern management is the desire to solve adaptive problems with the technical tools. If our sense of ourselves is based on how others perceive us, this is the outward orientation. We need to outside approval to take action. It is important for us to be among others to feel safe. We feel important when we have personal results and recognition. This is like a typical leader's dilemma. I want to fulfill my mission. I want real changes, and I want everyone to like me. And that is impossible. If I need a certain image, like status, attitude of colleagues, in order to feel my dignity and stay safe, I use what is called like try not to lose. In this state, we are trying basically to achieve significant results in a way that does not involve taking risks. I want to be part of something big, and I want to be safe at the same time. As a result, we play small. Let's think of underlying operating system as reactive. Its architecture is designed basically to avoid problems. And there are three key ways to do it, three key ways to avoid problems. So like movement towards people, belonging to a group, desire to please others, not a willingness to take risks, not to start difficult conversations, etc. Movement from people, so distancing in relationship, arrogance, criticality, detachment. And anti-movement is personal ambition and being autocratic. We use to get others to do what matters to us. What happens in a creative transition? We keep gifts, so-called gift for each tendency, but update the operating system. I still want people to like me, but I control it, and this is not that drives me. If we remove big I from each of these tendencies, we become able to take care of relationship, to be real ourselves, and create the results we want. So the integrated model shows skills a good leader should have. So strong intention, convincing vision, translated into strategy, ability to stay focused, decisive action, system awareness, self-awareness, emotional intellect, authenticity and direct communication, competent relationship building. Only 20% of adults have a consciousness in which these competences can fully unfold. Or in other words, they made this transition from reactive to creative. Let's relate to this level of complexity in which we live and work. We see that it requires integrated thinking and willingness to take adaptive challenges. environment forces us to accelerate not only in release of mobile applications, not only in the development of leadership competences, but also in the renewal of consciousness on which these competences can work. So basically, Robert's 20 years of work led to creation of the leadership circle. And this circle is a dynamic model of how thinking and competencies of a leader are interconnected. So the top part is the creative competencies and higher. The bottom part is reactive tendencies. We want creative leadership with balanced focus on tasks and people. So what's at the heart of creative competencies? I mentioned the integration of existing theories, so not invention of the bicycle. And what are these theories? So McClelland theory of motivation, Drucker, like obviously goal-setting visionary, Robert Fritz, creative and reactive orientations, Peter Senge, system awareness, system thinking, Michael Wiesborg, system design, Peter Block, authenticity, Kuznets and Posner, integrity, authenticity, from Maslow to Goldman, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, Robert Keegan, Lisa Leahy, stages of adult development. So the bottom part is the developmental psychology of an adult, starting from Karen Horney, the middle of last century, 3 ways to be with others, and we are already familiar with them, through the writings of cognitive psychologists to the writings of Robert Keegan, Lisa Leahy, which show how to work with these limiting beliefs. So on the top, there are 18 creative competencies. On the bottom, 11 reactive tendencies and the beliefs behind them. Now, another part, basically, why I like the model is part that kind of impressed me from the very beginning is that Robert and Bill were very careful with the measurement and validation. So they asked the question, okay, we've got now the models, which is graphically represented with a circle, and the model looks nice, right? But is there really a connection in between these competencies in the circle, which we've learned to measure, and the quality or the level of leadership provided? So they made the research about it and noticed high enough correlation to state that. So that was one part. And then another interesting question, like, okay, we've learned how to measure level of leadership, but is there any really connection in between this level of leadership and the financial results, which is very much relevant question for a lot of us. So they did additional research, and so again, quite sufficient correlation. Actually, the visualization of the results you can see now on the slide. The left circle is the average picture of top 10% of responders sorted by financial results, and the actually it's the right one, right? And the left one is the bottom 10% sorted by financial results, and difference is obvious, like you can see it. So, like through the years, it was more than 100,000 leaders that go through this tool through basically 15 plus years with more than million evaluators. So there is like more than enough data basically to validate it and to see the tool in real use. And we are like moving closer and closer to the end. So before, I'd like to recommend some of the readings mentioned in the book, mentioned in my presentation. The first one probably should be well known for the Kanban community with Kanban maturity model. And then the two books by Bob and Willie Adams, so folks behind the leadership circle, the model that I've shown. So two books. And then the one on the right is the relatively recently published book of Michael Spade and Michel Mador, Agile Transformation. And that's primarily about the integral model for agile transformations. And leadership is quite important aspect of it, and the same leadership circle is used by Michael quite a lot and referenced there as well. Well, what's in the end? Leadership is critical to organizational change and development, and good news is there are ways basically to work with this. So, and where to start, from whom to start, of course with yourself, and then gradually other leaders will follow, and the organization will begin to take those very evolutionary small steps towards a better version of itself. This journey of constant change becomes basically part of our DNA, part of us. And if you ask, what's the secret sauce, the answer will be, well, there is no secret. We just work like this always. In successful evolutionary changes, Kanban dissolves, and the only habit of rational, pragmatic changes remains. So with that, I think I've more or less quickly run through all the stuff I had. Probably the last one is with my contact. So from here, I think let's jump into the questions if we have any.
So there are no questions in the chat. If anyone has any, please feel free to ask them now. If, like I said, if you don't feel comfortable asking it on video, just type it into the chat and I'll ask it for you.
I have a question. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I was nodding a lot because some of it was familiar, some of it was new. And especially I was triggered by your circumplex model where you had the 10% low performers and then a 10% business top performers, I think. And then, right, this one. Is that your data?
No, this is from leadership circle. Again, this the leadership model, as I say, is 3-in-1. Apart from the model, it's the tool basically to measure leadership competences. And that's work as a 360 tool. Obviously, leadership is impossible without in the outer space, without others. So you have to have followers, right? So it's only possible in organizational context, and the only real way to measure it would be asking others working with you about your leadership, and that's what the tool does. So it has a survey, it takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete. It has 124 closed questions where basically you rate the person, and then several open questions. And from the data of that, from evaluators, you've got your profile built for you. And actually, if you just give me a second, so on this circle, what you can see, I hope you can see it with the green, that's the results of by your evaluators, and then bold black line, it's your self-evaluation. So you can also see how you see yourself comparing to where you are, which is very often with every evolutionary change is very important because you're building on top of what you have, and it is very important to understand basically where you are, and that can also help with it. So this data of this research is from Leadership Circle 4. So they've conducted it. It was done some time ago, but like I still think it's very much relevant. And I guess, Karen, just one more thing, like with everything, as I said, most of the slides are clickable. So in case of this research, like if you click on the slide, it will get you to the white paper on that, so you can read all the details about it.
Very good. Thank you very much. So if I understood or interpret it correctly, then these leadership teams were either the person, him or herself, or his or her subordinates, they have ranked on the right circle, they have ranked him or her to be more on the creative space, and these leaders seem to work in businesses that have better results. And on the other hand, leaders who have either self-judged or both have been judged by others to be more reactive, they work for businesses who do not perform as much. And I was interested in that kind of research, but I understood I can click on that and I will find the paper. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
And again, just to get back to this, like, of course, like obviously the real result is a result of your evaluators, and your own estimation is important only from the perspective of how different it is.
Can you clarify that?
I mean that your leadership is determined, like the level of your leadership is determined by others, those who work with you. And how you see it is only important in terms of your consciousness and understanding of where you are.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, I can elaborate on that. Actually, it's interesting because look, for most of these topics, I can go on and on and on for hours. So like with this one, as you can see, like you can see my cursor, right?
Yes.
So with the bottom part, the tendency is for leaders to like overestimate themselves. Like with the top result, the tendency is to underestimate themselves, which is interesting, and which I can also confirm from my own practice because I'm using the tool when working with organizations.
So then I have another question, if I may ask it. Let's assume there's a young professional and he is more on the right side. He himself would judge himself as more creative, not overestimating himself, but rather, more like quiet. And then he is in a culture of where people are hierarchy based, where there's power distance, where his behavior is actually not adequate. And so he will change his behavior towards the more reactive and the, let's say, old world way, right? Because if it's only one or two people, then they would adjust to the culture around them. So how many people of the, let's say, more creative, more open, the new generation of leaders, I would call them, how many do I need for the culture to be changed?
There's kind of several things here that I'd like to address. First off, I would be cautious about not mixing culture and leadership, because like cultures, yes, it could be different, but like even with different cultures, it basically different, I would say, sets of values that are relevant for organization. With the leadership development or adult development, this vertical development, it is different. Now, to your question about how many do you need in order to change the culture? Don't really recall at the moment, like research on this or reading on this. From my own experience, I should say that first off, if talking like all organizational culture, then of course it is important of like where you are in organization. Like, of course, it is some, depending on your position, you may have more or less influence to it. But with that said, very often within the organization, you may have like different pockets or different departments with cultures which are significantly different from like overall organizational culture. And it could be, again, with the cultures, there is no like good or bad culture. It's usually the byproduct of the way how basically of the goals we are achieving and how we are achieving those goals. And very often we are like deliberately separating some pockets in order to create different cultures because what we want is a new way of achieving results, right? And then the typical challenge would be how you are using that experience for organization overall, because it's easy to build the new, shiny, small, innovative department, which is located somewhere else. Then it may not be that easy to do the same with the global organization.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Hi, Zane from Cape Town. I'd like to just share an observation here, Kirill. Okay, so what struck me about this leadership model, I mean, it's the first time I'm seeing it, is I kind of see a correlation here with Jordan Peterson's 5-factor model. So, you know, if you're looking at that creative space, it represents people with a high degree of openness, probably reasonably agreeable, relatively maybe extroverted. And, you know, that speaks to that creative relationship thing, side of things, which look pretty strong. So, yeah, just some interesting correlations that I'm seeing between two different approaches. Anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for sharing. That's interesting. I like frankly, I haven't seen it, but I'd like to explore more.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So I'd personally like to thank Kirill for this amazing presentation, and thank you all for joining tonight. So should we give him one of the meetup claps on video?
Excellent
Thank
job. Thank
you,
you very
and
much.
feel like absolutely free to reach out to me in case you think of the questions later on. That's fine. As you see, I'm willing to share about this stuff, so that's totally fine.
I'd also like to personally thank Simon Machin and TVF Consulting, who sponsors our Zoom for the whole year. So this is really helping us kind of put on these events every month. And if you are interested in coming to the event next month, it's going to be a bit earlier than this one. So it's going to be the 6th of May, and we have Andreas Bartel talking about the quest to increase organizational maturity. So that would be potentially a nice complementary topic to today's one. So without further ado, since there is a bit of, at least over here, there is a bit of daylight left, I'd like to wish you all a nice evening and see you next month.
Thank you all.
See you.